Okay, I hope I've been aware that my mic's been on for a while now, so
We all want hot dogs.
I'm going to do my best to sort of traverse, scan, you know, and that way I'm going to do my very best not to, you know, ignore or, you know, not to address people that would like to hear. So I've got three things. I'm basically going to try to do this in a half an hour to maybe a little bit more, but then there'll be room for some questions. My understanding is that we have the porch from 2 to 3, so we'll try to adhere to that. I want to try. So if you're taking notes for the 10-point quiz, I want to try to cover these three big topics and then fill in some blanks. The sea highway and commerce, the fact that the big ships, the big tall ships, really, at least from my point of view, did more than just about anything else to develop commerce in Puget Sound. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the ships. So I'm going to take really good care with that because I'm quite well aware. I'm a student and an amateur of maritime history. So, you know, things that might interest me would not be interesting to you at all. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ships and tell you a little bit about the differences in the ships that played a role here. And so that you might have just a bit more background with that. And then I want to finish up by talking, when we refer to before the mast, some of you probably read Richard Henry Dana in 3 Years Before the Mast. When a sailor would refer to being on board for his period of time, they would say, I've been before the mast for, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it's been. That's because their living quarters, such as they were, and I'll tell more about that as time goes by, where everything was before the mast. In other words, between the first mast and the bow of the boat. And so that's why they refer to it that way. And there's more to tell about that. So those are going to be the story of the people, the story of the ships, and the story of commerce, and they're all going to be fairly short stories, but we'll do our best to give you some background and maybe enough to where you'd like to do a little more research on your own. I've titled this The Windjammers, and some of you might be curious to know, well, so what's a windjammer, and how did it come to be called that? There were a couple of antecedents to it. One is that in the days when windjammers or the big tall ships were kind of going out of style because steam and diesel and other things were coming in. I'll tell more about that, but the dock hands and people, the stevedores and the people who were involved in that kind of activity referred to them as windjammers because they got in the way. They were not easy to move around. They didn't have any engines, and so they would jam up things. and so the dock people and the warehouse people would refer to them in that way, kind of a condescending way, as, oh, that's a windjammer, that kind of deal. The other side of it is that windjammers were big, tall ships, tall meaning that they had tall masts, and that they carried a lot of sail, and the sail was designed to jam the wind, to pick up the wind and move the boat along. That's all they had for propulsion. So those are the two reasons that they're known. The more romantic is the latter. You know, the era of the windjammers. Sometimes we refer to them as tall ships. There are other, you know, other names for them, but those are, you know, the big sailing ships. And then there are more technical terms that I'll get into in just a moment. So these are the three big topics that I want to try to fill you in on just a bit today. Now, let's see, something wrong. One of the, oh, hello. One of the things that I like to acquaint people with when we're talking about particularly the history of Puget Sound is that out there was the highway. Now, most people today don't see it that way. They see number 5 as the highway and all the other, you know, roads that we've built. And some people talk about the railroad that way, the early railroad for sure. But really, early people here, this was a kind of a hard place to get around. Things were thick, the forests were, you know, everywhere. It wasn't that easy to go on land, and it was very hard to build a road. Am I doing something wrong here?
No, you're fine. I just
Okay.
turned it down here.
And so, early people that were here figured out very quickly that it's a whole lot easier to go on water than it is to go on land. And some of you are probably quite well familiar with the idea of the native people developing and designing and making beautiful big canoes that were very seaworthy and actually kind of works of art. And there's some over here, there's some downstairs that I hope you'll look at. I'm always trying to promote the museum to people. I'm a docent out at the lighthouse, and I say, you know, stop by the museum. It's a good spot, and you will enjoy seeing all the things that are part of the history of our area as they're at the museum. But so as time went by, a couple of things really happened. One was that San Francisco, California had a gold rush, and most of the gold came to be deposited in San Francisco. And San Francisco decided we gotta get big here, and we need some lumber. And it was about that same time that lumber, a lot of it, was discovered in the Pacific Northwest. So people with a keen eye to developing commerce and making some money for themselves in those days said, yeah, let's get some ships, go up the coast, grab wood, come back down, build San Francisco. And that was pretty much a very main piece of commerce that started to develop Puget Sound, as well as started to, before the fire in 1906, make San Francisco. The ships went elsewhere. My topic today is more about the development of commerce in Puget Sound. They went to Hawaii, they went to Asia. In fact, Congress, after the basic settlement, or as the West was trying to be settled, was encouraging more commerce with Asia. And of course, Puget Sound was a primary, was seen as a primary partner in that kind of venture. So what was the commerce about? Well, I've already mentioned lumber, and lumber was the big one. Ships left here loaded with lumber, up to 1,000 tons of lumber, and that's really what built San Francisco. In fact, my good friend Mark is going to talk at some point about the captains of Whidbey Island, and Captain Coop, Thomas Coop, not today. Thomas Coop was responsible for putting the very first pilings in at the San Francisco Wharf, and those pilings came from right here in Coopville. But there were other things. Okay, pickled salmon was all the rage in Southern California after they discovered that we had salmon as well as lumber, and barrels and barrels and barrels of salmon went down to the Southland and was very popular, as was oysters. Shellfish, again, we had it, they wanted it, and so again, that added to the commerce, added to the cargo of the big ships. Alaskan cod became another. Alaskan cod fed thousands of people, and it also was a major piece of commerce. We would send ships up to Alaska, get for fishing, and then run on down to the Southland. Another big one was coal. People don't realize how much coal was available here, and in Canada, up around Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, as well as places here, Black Diamond, for instance, big seams of coal, and coal was loaded and taken down. And then, of course, Canadian whiskey. And especially after the Volstead Act in 1919, Canadian whiskey became a much more favored cargo and was transferred. And again, this isn't the topic today, but Whidbey Island became one of the great smuggling spots for Canadian whiskey during the Prohibition era, and very popular. And because it was a whole lot better than the whiskey that people were basically attempting to drink here. So those were the big guns. There were passengers, and there were other things, other kinds of cargo. Usually the ships would come here, gather a cargo. Again, a lot of times it was lumber, and go on down to basically the Bay Area, deposit, and then San Francisco would send things up for our developing communities here along the Puget Sound coastline. If you ever hear the term, a ship would be running in ballast, all the ships in that era had basically used big rocks for ballast, okay? They typically did not have a very deep keel, and as a result they had to have a weight advantage to staying upright in the water, and so rocks were what was used. Now, if we use the term running in ballast, it basically means they were running empty, and they didn't want to do that because that's, they weren't making money at that point. And so it's like, if we can carry cargo from here to there and then from there to here, we're in good shape. We make money in both directions. So I just wanted to maybe not overemphasize, but at least make it apparent to you that while times have changed, we have roads, we have railroads, we have airplanes, we have lots of things that they didn't have then. What they had was the water, and that was the highway. And I think, like for instance, if you go out to the Fort Casey and you're looking out at Admiralty Inlet, same highway that was there then. and ships, of course, you're probably all well aware, ships come and go all the time through that passage. So that was the highway to economic independence for places like Seattle and Tacoma that were battling at that point to who could be the best port. And Tacoma got the railroad, and so they like to think that they won. But Seattle, after a while, got at least a connection, and now, of course, they've got a railroad in too, and then everybody took off. They were no longer sleepy little sawmills on mudflats. They were starting to really develop their commerce. Okay, what about the ships and the cargo? Well, you've heard me say tall ships, and I haven't used the word square rigger yet, but I will now. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of background about, okay, so what were these ships like? They're not like the ones today, but they did carry literally tons of cargo between basically 1860 and 1910. Most of these ships were between 100 and 200 feet long, so it gives you an idea of how big they were. Some of them were even bigger yet, but most of them were in that range. There were different names, and again, you know, I have a background in biology, so I, you know, have these words like nomenclature and things like that stuck in my mind. But there were different kinds of ships, and they were known by different kinds of names. Give you an example here. A brig was a two-masted ship, okay, with two masts, and it was totally square rigged. Now what I mean by square rigged is this example here. My great wife is give me a hand, but you can see a square rigged ship, this kind of a sail, when it was unfurled, basically made a square, okay? And so that's the big reason that they were called square rigged. These ships also carried head sails up here. I did not do that.
It doesn't like you to get close to the thing. I'll hold it over here.
We refer to them today more as head sails or jibs. Okay, jibs, it's a good word in Scrabble if you get a J. Triple word score, you know. Lauren, no, I can't. Lauren beats me every time. But I get good words. You know, that's my claim to fame. I don't make much of a score, but I get good words. So these are called head sails or jibs. They come in different sizes for different purposes. But the square rig were what most ships in the in 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, that's what you're going to see. And one of the problems with square rig ships is that there are a lot of lines that you have to manipulate to make the ship go, okay? If you don't know what a halyard is, hey, take that home with you today. Halyard is a word that comes from Middle English in the 13th century, and basically it means to haul by rope. Okay, that's how it evolved. It evolved to halyard, and that what a halyard does on a ship is raise and lower sail. So you would not refer to it as a rope. Okay? You would refer to it as a halyard, and a halyard raises and lowers sail. Okay. While I'm on the topic, today there's only one rope on a ship. Everything else, even though it looks like a rope, it smells like a rope, it acts like a rope, it's not a rope. So a halyard is a rope that raises and lowers sail. A sheet is a rope that trims sail. Okay, so you're going to manipulate the sail to trim it, and that's called a sheet. And this one, this one doesn't have exactly, but in any case, a brace is a line that will hold a yard in place, and these yards could be traversed, okay? Meaning that they could be shifted to pick up wind. Not like a modern sailboat can, but they could be traversed a bit. And those were called braces. And like, if you've ever seen Mutiny on the Bounty, Trevor Howard, you know, one of the orders that he gave to the crew when they were leaving Portsmouth, England, was lee braces. Okay, what that meant was you're going to harden up on the lee brace, on the lee part of the ship, and the brace, so that the sails will stay where we want them to stay. That's what that. Now there are other lines. I said there was today one rope on a ship, and that's called the bell rope. And that will ring the bell. Okay? There's another one, and I will tell you, I don't want to offend anybody, Mark knows, and I'll get to it in a little bit.
That's my question.
So, there were brigs, two-masted, usually smaller, okay? A brigantine is two-masted. One mast has square rigs, like this one. The other has what we call a gaff rig. A gaff rig is like this
Can you
one.
hold that one up?
Yeah. A gaff rig ship, this is a model, this is Blue Nose. Now again, if you're a nerd like me and you are into maritime history, you know all about Blue Nose. But if you don't, this is another little trivia you can take home with you. Blue Nose was one of the really great sailing ships. She never lost a race, ever, in her entire career. Built in 1921, and not only that, she was a wonderful fisherman. She carried cargo and was also a racing yacht. And so this is the model. Rick Townsley is donating this to the museum, and we had it out in the wind, unfortunately. There's a couple of little small repairs. And I'll get to this. Blue Nose was a schooner, and I'll get to it in just a sec. There were also barks. If you could maybe sit down and hold it if you wanted, because I'm probably referring to it in a minute. Yeah. A bark was a little bit larger than a brig, carried 3 masts. The first 2 had square rigs, like this one. The last one was called a mizzen mast, not that you need to know that, and that had a gaff rig sail on it. So a bark, a technical bark was 3 masts, all of them were square rigged. A barkentine all had 3 masts, 2 of them were square rigged, 1 was gaff rigged, like this. So, and I'll tell you about the gaff rigs right now. Schooners became the stars of the show in Puget Sound. Schooners had a lot of advantages. They were fast. They carried less crew because they had less rigging. So owners didn't have to pay as much for the crew. They also could take a deck load. In other words, they could put lumber right on the deck, slide it right on with big skids, and they could also hold in the hold. Okay? People like to carry lumber because it floats. and so if you get into trouble, and there were times actually in shipwrecks and whatnot where the salvagers said, hey, let's just see if we can keep it afloat because it's got lumber on it, and we'll drive it onto a beach and then we can salvage it. And now with coal and other things, that was not as common. You couldn't really do that. The boat would go down. Blue Nose had, now this gets, some of you start to roll your eyes. every one of these sails has a name. And that's true here too. Now, that won't be on the quiz, but, but believe it or not, every one of them has a name. The big one, I'm just going to say what the big one, this is the mainsail, okay? And the mainsail was always the biggest sail on a board ship. Blue Nose, as a schooner, you can see mast, so two-masted schooner. Some schooners went all the way up to six-masted schooners, okay? They were fast, they were usually 20, some of them could go 25 knots, okay? That's fast for a sailboat. And they could carry up to 1,000 tons of cargo. So they were workhorses, and they were very good. The other thing, they could fit into places that these ships could not. The square riggers, typically a little bit beamier, meaning across. They would tend to wallow around in seas. Schooners would just cut right through. So like I say, they're faster, less crew, and they could fit into what used to be known as dog holes. And a dog hole was basically just a small harbor, and that was the deal. Okay, thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Where were these ships made? Just be brief. But one example would be the Hall brothers at Point Ludlow. Port Ludlow, we had a number of very, very good, they came from the East Coast, but they were very good shipwrights. And the Hall brothers became very famous in Puget Sound and around the world for building ships like this one, like Blue Nose. And I want to, schooner, here's a good trivia question for you. How did a schooner get its name? Okay. A schooner, when they first started to build schooners, this is a story, I'm not sure it's true, but it's a story. One of the captains said, "Look how she scoons." Okay. Now, that's a Dutch term, which is a flat rock that you throw. All of us have probably done that. You've schooned it across the water. Okay, that's how schooners got their name, because they would schoon along. They were faster. Okay, so another little trivia dazzle for you. Ships like these and this one. They were full of hazards. They did not have any brakes. They relied totally on the wind. Okay, they didn't have engines. So bringing them into port was a big challenge. And especially along the coast from here, as again, we're trying to develop commerce, going down to San Francisco, lots of bars, okay? There's Coquille, there's Newport, there's all the way down. There were ports that people they wanted to get into, but the river bar a lot of times would foul up. Waves would, a river bar is the river meets the ocean. Okay, a lot of force there. None more so than the Columbia River Bar. And the Columbia River Bar became known as the graveyard of the Pacific. Over 2,000 ships were wrecked on the Columbia River Bar. And they built the jetty in 1906, and that helped some. But before that, it was incredibly hazardous. And the bars were considered, if you could make it across the Columbia River Bar, you were a good captain, because and a lucky one too. So that was a big part of the picture. On to, well, I will say, just quickly, what happened to the big wind ships? Many of them ended sadly. For one thing, steam happened. Steam was considered to be the up-and-coming technology back at the turn of the century. Well before that, but in that, as far as maritime, with steamships. And this picture here, which Mark has donated to the lighthouse, is a good example. I need several hands. You can see, here's a square rigger. Okay.
Watch out for the ship behind you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And what happened to begin the basically downfall of the wind ships, the steamships started to haul the wind ships in, and they would pick them up about where a pilot picks up the big cargo ships nowadays at Port Angeles. And they would throw what they called a hawser line, or a hawse, around, and then like this steam tug would actually tow them in. That made it much easier for them, because the tug with lines on it could handle the ships and bring them into a berth much easier than the ship could actually get in there by itself. So this picture, I like to use it at the lighthouse to talk to people that are interested. Really depicts the kind of the beginning of steam and the ending of the big tall ships. And then the steamships, of course, got well beyond tugs. They got bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually they were as big as the big tall ships, and they would traverse. Now the problem with steam was, there were a couple of problems that the tall ships didn't have. One was, of course, they caught fire. And so a steamship is made out of wood, has a boiler, steam driven, and they caught fire and they would blow up. So those were hazards for, steamship operation. But they were big, they carried a lot of cargo, and they could make the run from here to San Francisco pretty handily. Not always beating the wind ships. Some of the wind ships were actually just as fast, but steam was kind of taking over, in that it became more and more popular thing to have. And the other problem with steam, and I'm sure most of you know this, but it's very inefficient. Steam is about 8% efficient. Okay, so you burn a lot of wood to get 8% out of your forward propulsion, and coal and wood were, steam. Everybody loves steam, especially on the railroads. The big engines they were very powerful. Steam is very powerful, but it's not economical. And so, in some of you may know this better than I, but I'm thinking that it was 1906. Rudolf Diesel started to market his diesel engine. He had actually made a diesel engine before that, but the marketing and all that, and then the diesel engine started to take over. Diesel engines could burn vegetable oil, for one thing, and the other thing was they didn't catch fire. And so they became a very much more popular, and as time went by, they took over from steam. Okay, life before the mast. Thank you, Mark, very much. I don't know if you want to put that down. This was basically in this era, the age of sail, the great age of sail, is basically before germ theory started to make its way into the medical lexicon. And so life aboard ship was pretty unsanitary. Most of you would not want to do it. This was not a cruise. Okay. uh, the living quarters for the common sailor were, as I said, before the mast. They were up front. It was windy, it was cold, and it was wet almost all the time. The diet consisted primarily of dried biscuits, sometimes they're referred to as hardtack. As time went by on a voyage, they became full of weevils and, maybe some protein, but not very tasty. Salt pork and rancid water. And every so often, especially if they made port and everybody was happy, some grog. What grog was basically watered down rum, sometimes some whiskey, but mostly rum, and it was usually pretty well diluted. So, but that's, you hear about grog, that's what it was. If you can imagine this, when you go home tonight and you lay your head down, think about 21 inches, okay? That's how much room they had for their hammocks, okay? So here you are in a damp, dark hold on a ship, on your hammock, 21 inches, moving, you can move 21 inches. And then, of course, there was the bathroom. And that's the other rope that I was talking about. A lot of kids, they'll say, well, how do I go to the bathroom? And it's like, well, here's how. In the very bow of the boat, okay, there was a little platform, and that was politely called a seat of easement. And so if to do your business, you had to go out. Now, why? Well, because water was always washing up on the bow of the boat, and as a result, after you did your duty, you would just wash it away. One thing, also took care of the smell, if there was any, and so that was part of the picture. In addition to that, again, this don't mean to be too technical here, but wiping your bottom was the second rope. Okay. And that was called a tow rag. And a tow rag was basically a piece of unused or discarded line, hemp in those days, that was frayed at the end, and that's what you used to wipe yourself after you had used the toilet. Now you can imagine they were totally exposed. You're hanging out. So it was an adventure, in and of itself. Also, many sailors in those days existed in what they called a Shanghai, or a Shanghai condition. Port Townsend was famous for this. Now, you've all probably heard of the Barbary Coast in San Francisco. That was the most famous one. But Port Townsend had its own reputation. And a Shanghai sailor basically have a young man working in the logwoods, come into town, visit a bar, have a drink. Next thing they knew, their drink was spiked. They were down on the floor, and they dropped through basically a trap door down below onto another boat. That boat was rowed out to the waiting square rigger or schooner, and the next thing they knew, they were on their way to Shanghai, and that was what it was. And this happened. Port Hudson today was famous for being a den of pirates and people who would Shanghai the sailors. The sailors, for their part, actually, they learned, they wizened to the point where they knew word of mouth and whatnot, what was a good ship, and what was a good captain. Now the problem was it wasn't always the captain that was the bad guy. It was what they called the bucko mate, and the bucko mate was a first mate on the ship. We have them today on cruise ships. We have a first mate. These guys were usually not nice people, and so they were the kind of the boss of the crew. And if the bucko mate was bad, everybody, you know, tended to not want to go on that ship. And so that, again, they were called hell ships in those days. What was work detail like on a ship? Endless maintenance. These big wood ships would deteriorate all the time. I mean, they were self-destroying in themselves. So caulking the seams was always to do. Making knots, using rope, lines to do various chores with. Let's see, I'm missing something here. No, okay. But people were busy, and they were on 24-hour call. So if the ship got into any kind of difficulty, or when they reached port, you got up, and you know, whether you were asleep or not. And if you got into difficulty at sea, you were on deck, and that you know. So it was not an easy job. Okay, now how did I do? Well, okay, we haven't got to 3 o'clock yet, so we're okay. How about some questions? Anything that you'd like to ask me? Yes, ma'am.
You said that during maintenance, they caulked the seams.
Caulks.
What did they use?
Tar, for the most part.
Tar,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Jim?
You mentioned the draft of these galleons or whatever they were called, but what about the schooner? Is it inherently had a different draft than these other boats?
Like, for instance, Blue Nose.
Yeah.
Oh, what another
What
question?
was the draft of the ship?
The draft, the typical draft of a, now, the big square riggers, a lot of times, did not have a very big keel. They, as I said, they have ballast, you know, and so a lot of times they could come into what we would consider reasonably shallow water based on the size of the ship. Blue Nose had a 16-foot draft. And a lot of the schooners did have more of a keel. And so 16 feet is, you know, significant, but it's not too bad. In comparison to, like, for instance, a steamship that later became, for instance, calling here at Cookville, some of the early Mosquito fleet, they were basically flat bottomed. So they could come in on inches of water, really, you know.
So that would be a disadvantage.
Didn't it help them sail upwind as well, Bill?
Scale up wind?
Didn't the keel help them sail closer to the wind than the...
Yeah, the schooners and of course our modern ships definitely help. A modern sailboat, a sloop for instance, can usually, what we usually refer to as pinching, can get 45 degrees, you know, which is...
Square rigger?
Square rigger, probably more like 20-25 degrees. They were not particularly adept at really sailing upwind.
You mean 25 degrees into the wind?
Yeah. In other words, I'll give you an example. Let's say coming down the straits of Juan de Fuca, okay, turn the corner at Flattery, come down, you traverse your yards to pick up the south-southwest, and that would work out to about 20 degrees.
You're not saying they can sail in that close to the wind?
Oh, no. 20 degrees into the wind would be practically straight on into the wind. No, they couldn't do that. No, they back up. They did that. Yeah, no, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Of the schooners was that they could sail within 45 degrees of the wind, and square riggers could maybe do 70 or
Yeah,
75.
yeah. Square riggers definitely not as adept at that. Schooners could, and that's one of the big advantages to a schooner. They could make ports that the big square riggers might not even be able to make. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question totally,
What
but
did they spike the drinks with? I want to try that.
probably just about anything they had. The grog was preferred unless it was spiked with rancid water, which is usually what happened. I mean, they would dilute it, you
No, I
know.
mean to knock somebody out.
Opium. Opium.
I always imagined somebody got a.
Yeah, well, that happened too. Yeah, that happened too. People were shanghaied in a number of different directions, in a number of different ways, but one of the common ways was spiking their drink with, and it was laudanum or opium.
With what?
Laudanum. Opium.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, they'd be
Yeah, that'll be.
flat on the floor, you know.
Jim has a question.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
Bill, do you know when Lovejoy stopped making ships, and do you know when the sawmill disappeared?
Lee, do you know that? Lee's an expert on, when did Lovejoy stop making ships? Do you know?
I'm gonna have to come closer.
When did Lovejoy stop making ships? When did Lovejoy stop making ships?
Oh, well, they made ships for a long time because they moved from Coopville to Seattle, and they even built steel ones.
What were
Yeah.
they?
So,
But
uh,
when did they discontinue the sawmill, which my understanding was
For
it's
steel
pretty close
ships.
by here.
How about for sailors' ships? They were talking about?
yeah, I don't know. That'd be the steamboats primarily.
Yeah, probably when they discontinued the steamboat. So I guess my guess is that sawmill maintained the style. That's a good homework question for me. I don't know the answer to that exactly.
20s.
That's a good one.
20s, 30s,
Yeah.
right in there.
Yeah.
One thing that might be of interest to people is that one of the very last square rigger captains was from Coopville. That was Captain Joseph Clapp. His house is right over this way, Ron Van Dyke's house. It's a Lovejoy house, and he would be interviewed quite a bit in the newspaper in even the 40s, and he died in the 40s. Before he died, because he was their source. He was the last of the square rigger captains, and he had a voice.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, we've got quite a colorful history here. That in Cuba, I mean, this was a town of sea captains, and we got famous for that at one point. Question down below there?
So you talk about the sheets.
Uh-huh.
So the term 3 sheets to the wind, what does it mean nautically, and what is it? Why do we use it to mean?
Well, probably, that's a good question, and I'm gonna have to look that one up, but a sheet, if you, for instance, let's say if you're hauling in on a sheet on your jib, you're making it more taut, meaning that it's gonna pick up. If you let it go, then you're gonna let the jib go, and the sail is gonna, what they call luff, okay? And so, now, 3 sheets to it, would mean that you'd have to let all your sheets go, because every sail had a sheet on both sides of the boat. So because you had starboard and port trimming that you needed to do.
There's another explanation. It refers to windmills.
Oh,
Windmills usually have 4
Yeah, that's right.
sheets. And they'll run on 4 and they'll run on 2, but if you have 3 sheets to the wind, you're in trouble.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
Okay, what about
Thanks,
pissing
Rich.
up a rope? Pissing up a rope, is that nautical?
What?
Pissing up a road. It's up a
Good.
Inquiring minds want to
Yeah.
know.
Don't touch it, don't touch it.
Yeah, I'll leave that one be.
Question in a a related sense, you know, there was the platform for relief, but also wasn't there a poop deck?
Yeah, but that, as I understand it, again, that's good homework for me, but as I understand it, the poop deck was towards the stern of the boat. Yeah. And in terms of being underway and needing the bathroom, everybody was referred to the forward, yeah. That was, by the way, called the head.
I was just gonna say
Yeah. And the sailors would call it, sailors didn't refer to a seat of easement. They referred to the head. Yeah.
Bill, there's an example of a schooner down on the wharf in
Yeah,
Suva.
Suva. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tied up down there. right
Yeah.
now.
The Suva is a schooner. Okay.
And it's 100 years old.
Small one, but it is a schooner.
101.
And again,
Right.
mast configuration, you can see the forward mast a little bit shorter than the main mast. Okay, and that's one of the ways you can tell a
But it's a
schooner.
great example of a
Yeah.
schooner, which is.
How long would it take to get from here to San Francisco?
To go down to San Francisco to sail from here down on a good fast ship.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you can go out.
There were some pretty impressive records that were made. Now again, a lot of it had to do in those days. See, once you get outside, what I refer to as outside, meaning you hit the Pacific, you have a pretty much a prevailing north-northwest flow. And so you could really skim on down there pretty fast. And I've actually had that experience myself, not in a square rigger, but in a sailboat. And there were records saying that not stopping, okay, just going 25 hours. Yeah. So there.
So if they had oysters on board.
They were booming right along, yeah. And the big. Now this would be a schooner that was like 5 masts, everything up, all the sails up, and a good tailing wind. They could boom right along. Now, coming north in November, whole different story. Then you might have, and of course, people learned November to January or February, coming from San Francisco to Seattle was the danger zone. That because that's when our big gales, and some of you, I'm sure several of you have been out to Cape Flattery and Tatoosh Island. Tatoosh Island, there's a lighthouse out there. Now the Macaw Indians weren't too crazy about us putting a lighthouse out there. In fact, they attacked it. But there is a lighthouse out there, and there used to be a light ship out there as well. But in November through probably March or at least February, a gale coming up from the south at 60 knots. Weather would be very bad, and people would not see the light at Tatoosh Light at Cape Flattery. They would miss it, and they would keep going. And that's why the Vancouver Island, the rocky shore of Vancouver Island, is second only to the Columbia River Bar as being the graveyard of the Pacific, because so many people lost their lives and went aground on Vancouver Island.
Bill?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that clarification. Interesting information. But in regards to the Blue Nose, and because there might be some Canadians in the group, wasn't the Blue Nose a Canadian?
Absolutely, it was. It was made in. There's a little bay and a shipwright very close to
Lunenburg.
Lunenburg. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. That's it. And in Nova Scotia. Yeah, in 1921. Yeah. And she was. And I referred to she. Typically, correct language in the nautical world you refer to a vessel as a she, that goes back a long way. Vessels are holders of energy, and she's are holders of energy. And that's why a ship is referred to as a she. A vessel. Yeah. Sir?
I have a question about, you talk about sailing to San Francisco. How long did that trip take, and how did they keep perishable cargo that far and further from perishing?
Well, coal and lumber were not typically perishable,
Right.
and salmon were pickled. Again, I was explaining to our colleague here, if you had a following wind, which is typical as you hit the Pacific, it's usually a north-northwest, okay? And if you had all your sails up and you had a good fast ship, you could make San Francisco in a couple of days if you didn't stop. Yeah.
I know they exported a lot of shellfish to London.
Yeah, yeah.
How did they preserve it? Ice?
Ice.
Where'd they get it?
Alaska.
Mount
Baker. Yeah, Mount Baker. You know, a lot of stuff was preserved with salt, of course. You know, but and going from here to Europe required, you know, going down around Cape Horn, and then, you know, so that was a whole different thing. But most of the commerce that generated from here went to Asia, and still does, for that matter. And of course San Francisco that we talked about. Okay, very good. Well,
Thank you, Bill.
Bill, one more thing for
the good of the group.
Yeah. If you want to see a large six-masted ship underway, there's a film called Around Cape Horn.
Oh, yeah.
A very famous film
Yeah.
made in 1936.
Yeah.
And it is the only film that shows a fully rigged ship going around Cape Horn in Cape Horn conditions. That means green water over the deck. And the guy who made the film was in the rigging at the time, filming this with his 16mm camera. It's quite the...
Cape Horn was, you know, nobody wanted to go around Cape Horn. I mean, it was, now I will say, and then we need to finish, just as a tribute to one of our ancestors and to, once again, Coupeville, Flora Engel was the daughter of Mr. Pearson, who was the second lighthouse keeper out at Admiralty Head, okay? And that was, of course, known as the Red Bluff Lighthouse. Flora Engel, as a 16-year-old girl, came around Cape Horn by herself to be with her father, and later became lighthouse keeper at Red Bluff Lighthouse. And she's buried in the cemetery here in the Hill Cemetery right up here in Coupeville. And she was famous for a lot of things. She was a mover and a shaker kind of person, but just think about it, 16 years old, going around Cape Horn, which was incredibly hazardous in those days, and to meet her father in San Francisco. Well, actually, she got off in San Francisco and then got another boat up here. So she's one of our famous